We've got an emergency live. Have the Texas Longhorns found themselves a new running backs coach? Matt Zenitz of CBS Sports, aka 24/7 Sports, took to Twitter to report that West Virginia's Chad Scott has emerged as a leading candidate for the opening here in Austin. Who is Chad Scott? Is he the guy? Does this get you excited? Let's discuss on today's edition of the BK Show. What's up, guys and gals? Welcome into a rare live edition of the BK Show. This is your one-stop shop for Texas Longhorns content on YouTube. I'm your host, BK Brad Kellner. If you're in the live, comment with your thoughts. If you're watching this video after the fact, comment below with your thoughts on this potential hire for Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns. I mentioned the Matt Zenitz tweet that dropped at 4:59 Central Time earlier this afternoon, saying that Chad Scott has emerged as a leading candidate to become the next running backs coach at the University of Texas. A little while after, at 6:07 Central Time, Anwar Richardson of OrangeBloods.com reported that 3 names have emerged as the finalists to replace Tashard Choice. One of those names is Chad Scott, so we'll definitely spend a lot of time talking about him. The other 2 names that Anwar mentioned are Georgia Tech running back coach Norval McKenzie and Nebraska running backs coach EJ Barthel. So nothing is confirmed just yet, but it sounds like we're getting closer and closer to the answer to the question, who is going to be the next running backs coach at Texas? We might have our answer tonight. We might have it tomorrow. We might have it by the end of the weekend. But it has been 7 days since Tashard Choice informed the Longhorns that he is taking his talents to the NFL. And again, we might be nearing a conclusion to this week-long search for his replacement. Shout out to you, Tyler. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Part of me wants to give people a few more minutes to join the live. I didn't announce that I was going live, so not a lot of people probably know about this, but I don't want to waste y'all's time if you are watching. So we'll dive right in, and we'll start with Chad Scott since he got his very own tweet. We're going to do a little screen share. There we go. That works. We're upgrading our technology here on the BK Show. So Chad Scott has been at West Virginia since 2019. He served in various roles, including the interim head coach this past season for West Virginia's bowl game against Memphis after Neil Brown got fired following a 6-6 regular season. West Virginia lost that game, if that means anything to you. But Chad Scott has also been the offensive coordinator. He's been a co-offensive coordinator. He's been a run game coordinator. And, of course, he's been a running backs coach during his West Virginia stint. And, oh, by the way, even though West Virginia just changed head coaches, they fired Neil Brown. They hired Rich Rodriguez. Rich Rod actually retained Chad Scott on his new coaching staff as the running backs coach in Morgantown. So Chad Scott did a good enough job to where Rich Rod came in and decided that, no, you're good enough to stick around, despite making a bunch of changes throughout that staff. Before getting to West Virginia, Chad Scott spent time at North Carolina, at Kentucky, at Texas Tech, and at Troy. And you take a look at what West Virginia's run game has looked like over the last few years. Go back to this past season in 2024, the Mountaineers had the 27th ranked rushing offense in the country. Not the best, but not the worst. The Longhorns actually ranked 69th in that category. Not as nice as we would like. So West Virginia had a better rushing game than Texas did this past season. The Mountaineers averaged just over 193 yards per game on the ground this year. They had 3 guys go for more than 700 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. It's pretty impressive. You have 2 guys who hit those numbers. That's pretty good. West Virginia had 2 running backs and a quarterback that tallied, again, more than 700 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns apiece this past season. In 2023, the Mountaineers had the best rushing offense amongst Power 5 programs. They weren't number 1 in the country because, Army and Navy exist. The type of offense that they run. But if you just look at the Power 5 conferences, and there actually was a Power 5 in 2023, the Mountaineers had the number 1 rushing attack in America, averaging more than 228 yards per game. Best run game in the country? That'll play here in Austin. I wouldn't mind seeing that on the 40 acres in the years to come. Scott's offenses have featured a running back by committee approach. So everybody knows about Steve Sarkisian's streak of 1,000-yard rushers. That hasn't really been Chad Scott's MO at West Virginia, but he's found a way to have effective running games with 2, 3, sometimes 4 guys toting the rock over the years. And you go back to 2022, West Virginia has had 140 or more rushing yards in 26 of the 28 games that they've played in the last 3 seasons. So pretty consistent numbers for the Mountaineers on the ground. I think that is something that excites Steve Sarkisian. I think that's something that should probably excite Texas fans as well, because you're looking at a guy who has a proven track record of developing talent and a guy who has been able to put together successful running games at a consistent level. Because let's be honest, Texas was not consistent enough on the ground in 2024. Now, they had other issues, but the run game, again, ranking 69th in the country. I think Texas's run game struggles contributed to their red zone struggles, including their problems at the goal line that we really saw in the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State. Sorry to bring that up. We're all having a good day. You didn't need that. I didn't need that. That's on me. But the run game at times looked really good. The playoff game against Clemson was awesome. The game in College Station was incredible. The game against Arkansas was special. But against the best teams that Texas played, and more specifically, you look at the 3 losses that the Longhorns suffered, 2 to Georgia and 1 to Ohio State in the playoff, they weren't good enough running the football. I think they averaged like 2 yards a carry or less in all 3 of those contests. So that's not good enough. That's not good enough. As great as Tashard Choice was, and I don't put all of those struggles on him, there is room for improvement with the Texas running game. And again, different level of competition. The Big 12 is not as good as the SEC, but you look at some of the metrics from what Chad Scott has been able to do during his tenure in Morgantown, there's a lot to like right there. Appreciate the kind words, Brooks. Dopner. It's a dope last name. I don't know if it's Depner or Dopner. We're going with Dopner. Either way, it's dope. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for tuning in and chiming in tonight. A little bit more on Chad Scott. He played his college ball at Kentucky and North Carolina back in the early 2000s. He's 43 years of age. I'm not sure if I already mentioned that. He's originally from Florida. You see that on the graphic. That's good. One of the most talented states for recruiting in the country. And Texas has had some success recruiting the state of Florida in recent years, especially at running back. CJ Baxter, Jarrett Gibson, both of those guys, Florida kids. So to keep that pipeline going and to have established connections with this new running backs coach in the state of Florida, I think that is something that also appeals to Steve Sarkisian and something that appeals to Texas fans everywhere as well. So Chad Scott hasn't coached in Florida before, but he grew up there. Leads you to believe that he has at least some connections with some of the high school coaches within that state. So the 2 boxes that I'm looking to check with this hire, recruiting and development. The development is seemingly there. We talked about those WVU rushing numbers. I don't care what league you're in. To have 3 guys go for more than 700 yards and 6 touchdowns in a single season is impressive. To average 228 yards a game on the ground 2 years ago. By the way, that was the better Big 12 with Texas and Oklahoma still in the league. So to average 228 on the ground in that conference 2 years ago, very impressive. The development is there, and recruiting, again, ties to the state of Florida. That is a good thing. I will say this, and I don't think I'm breaking any news here. West Virginia does not recruit incredibly well. It's tough to recruit there. Like, I don't blame Chad Scott for that. There's not a lot of local talent. It's got to be hard to convince 18 to 22-year-olds to live in Morgantown, West Virginia. I've never been. I don't want to dunk on the place too much, but when you look at, other cities across the country, it sure seems like there's a laundry list of places that would be more fun and better to live in than Morgantown. So the recruiting numbers aren't great. The Mountaineers only had 1 4-star recruit in their entire class of 2024. They had 2 4-star recruits in the class of 2023. Everybody else was 3 stars or less. It's not like they had 5 stars and I'm just not mentioning them. It's a big deal for them to get a 4-star. Obviously at Texas, 4 and 5 stars are the norm, and that's the expectation here. So not a lot of recruiting success to speak of for Chad Scott. Doesn't have the best recruiting resume, but again, a lot easier to bring talent in to Austin, Texas, and to the University of Texas than it is to Morgantown, West Virginia, and to West Virginia University. And hey, even if Chad Scott isn't the most elite of elite recruiters, the Longhorns already have a really good coaching staff when it comes to recruiting, both with the position coaches and the coordinators, but also with the recruiting staff as a whole as well. So I think Chad Scott will become a great recruiter if he's not one already, because of all of the resources that he'll have to work with here in Austin. But again, if that's not his strongest suit, I still think Texas will be okay. I mean, the Longhorns have been able to bring in amazing running backs over the years, regardless of who the running back coach is, regardless of who's in charge of recruiting, regardless of any of those things. So I think Texas will be just fine from a talent accumulation standpoint. So there's Chad Scott. He got his own tweet. Again, Matt Zenitz of CBS Sports reporting that Chad Scott is emerging as a finalist for the running back coach vacancy that was left by Tashard Choice last week. But again, Anwar Richardson's tweet, I guess it was a treat as well. I'm going to make sure I know what I'm doing here with this screen share. I'm trying to switch names here. Let's see if this works. Does this work? Boom, it does. The other two names that Anwar talked about in his report a couple of hours ago, one of them is EJ Barthel, who is the current running backs coach at Nebraska. Made a nice little graphic about him. I wanted to show y'all, so we'll talk about him. He's been with Matt Rule for a while, was with Rule at Temple, was also with him in the NFL with the Carolina Panthers. And of course, now those guys are together in Lincoln with the Cornhuskers. I like the NFL experience. Barthel's coached at major college football. He's also coached in the NFL. That's a good thing. Anybody who comes to play football at Texas wants to ultimately play on Sundays. You get a guy who knows what it takes to be successful on Sundays, even though the Matt Rule era in Carolina didn't go very well. That's still a recruiting pitch. That's something that you could sell to high school kids, that you've got a position coach who has coached in the National Football League before and knows what success at that level looks like. An interesting note, though, about EJ, he just signed a contract extension this week. Like, I Googled his name right before we started this live, and the first thing that popped up were about 10 articles that said EJ Barthel has signed a 2-year contract extension at Nebraska, which includes a pretty hefty raise. So maybe that's stemming from the Texas rumors. Maybe EJ's being mentioned with a couple of other gigs as well. Who knows? I don't know what it means, because Tashard Choice, after reported interest from the Cowboys, signed an extension to stay at Texas. At least we thought it was to stay at Texas. But he got a new deal. He got more money. Everybody kind of assumed that he was going to stick around. And then less than a week later, what happens? Well, he's off to the Detroit Lions. So if Texas really wants this guy, Texas is going to get this guy. It's a better job right now. This ain't the 90s anymore. Sorry, Nebraska fans. Texas has more money, and if they want to bring EJ Barthel in, they will find a way to make this happen. Barthel does have experience with Kyle Flood. Those guys were together at Rutgers back in 2013 and 2014. He's been a running back coach at a number of different colleges, and again with the Carolina Panthers as well. And we talk about recruiting. Again, development and recruiting, the two things that I am looking for with this hire. EJ has been a recruiting coordinator as well. So, of course, when you're a position coach, you do in-home visits, and recruiting is a big part of your job. But this guy has actually been a recruiting coordinator as well, and he was one at Penn State back in 2017. So it's not like he held that job at some G5 or some FCS program. He was the recruiting coordinator at Penn State for a year, again, back in 2017. So that's a check next to the box by recruiting for EJ Barthel. He knows what it takes to get guys on campus. He knows what it takes guys to put pen to paper and ultimately sign with a program. Nebraska's rushing stats not nearly as good as West Virginia's this past year. The Cornhuskers ranked 92nd in America in rushing yards per game. They were 34th in that in 2023, but a big drop-off this past season. And again, Texas ranked 69th. Nebraska ranked 92nd. Nebraska doesn't have the talent. They didn't have the running backs or the offensive line that the Longhorns had this past season. I feel like I have to acknowledge that when talking about any of these candidates. But the numbers, again, not very pretty. Nebraska's run game has been inconsistent throughout the Matt Rule era. Nebraska's everything has been inconsistent since Tommy Frazier was there. You know that. I'm not breaking any news to anybody. But that's where we're at with EJ. So, again, mentioned by Anwar as one of the 3 finalists. I think Texas could do worse than EJ, but of these 2 names that we've talked about, I think I'm more in favor of the Chad Scott hire than I am the EJ Barthel hire. So now we go to candidate number 3. I keep doing this wrong. I should, when the screen share stops, it should be full screen me. There we go. Full screen me. I'm a narcissist. I want to see more of myself. Brooks says, I think Bucky Godbolt is available. I think so too. I've been trying to convince Buck on Texas Sports Unfiltered to throw his name in the ring as a candidate for the Texas running back coach opening, but I don't think he wants to deal with that anymore. He's nearing 70. So that takes a lot of time to be a position coach in today's college football with NIL and the transfer portal. And not only do you have to recruit your kids to campus once, you got to like re-recruit them every semester to make sure they don't leave. I don't know if Bucky wants to do that, but hey, he's got my permission to apply for that job. It'd be awesome if he returns to Texas as the running backs coach. Longhorn in Omaha, appreciate you stopping by. Not a big fan of Barthel. Thought he misused the running backs the last few years. Yeah, look, I haven't been locked in on every Nebraska football game over the last couple of seasons. I don't know if anybody outside of Lincoln has been. Hell, I feel like people in Lincoln probably haven't been with what that program has been putting that fan base through in recent years. So I don't know everything there is to know about the Nebraska run game, but I do know the stats this past season were not great. And yeah, I want Texas to get better on the ground, and I'm not 100% sure that EJ is the guy to do that. All right, let's get to the last candidate. I will say this before we get to the last candidate. Whoever Steve Sarkisian hires, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I trust in Steve Sarkisian. He's been money with just about every single assistant hire he's made since coming to Austin in 2021. I mean, members of his initial staff are still here. And then you look at some of the replacement coaches that he's brought in. Obviously, Tashard Choice was a Stan Drayton replacement. Excuse me. Just went full DJ there for a second. I think everyone believes Tashard Choice did a great job. You look at Chris Jackson. He's actually the 3rd wide receivers coach that Texas brought in. They had 3 in 3 years, but Jackson's clearly established himself as the guy. He's going into his 3rd season here in Austin. He's getting NFL looks as well. Texas was able to retain him, but Chris Jackson feels like a great hire. Kenny Baker as the defensive line coach, kind of an under the radar. I don't want to say no name, but a very small name coming in as an assistant D-line coach for the Miami Dolphins. Didn't really move the needle, especially considering who he was replacing in Bo Davis, who had been a part of multiple national championship staffs in his very impressive career as a college defensive line coach. Kenny Baker was awesome. And the Texas D-line was awesome this past year. So I trust Steve Sarkisian to get these hires right. You know, they just hired a guy from Rutgers, and I've talked myself into believing that he's going to be a good coach. That obviously is Mark Orfe, the new safeties coach that Texas brought in following the departure of Blake Gideon. So I think Sark has earned the benefit of the doubt. I know he's earned the benefit of the doubt for me. I think he's earned it for most of Longhorn Nation. If he hasn't, let me know what you guys think. All right, one more finalist to talk about. Let's see. Can we do this right this time? Moment of truth. Say a prayer. Boom. There we go. Looks good. Norval McKenzie, the 3rd and final name we are going to discuss because he was the 3rd and final name mentioned in the Orange Bloods report from a couple of hours ago. Norval McKenzie, the running backs coach at Georgia Tech. You know who else was a running backs coach at Georgia Tech before coming to Texas? The aforementioned Tashard Choice. I'd say Steve Sarkisian poaching a coach from the Yellow Jacket staff worked out pretty well the last time he did it. Maybe they go back to that well again. A big thing that Texas is losing with T-Choice going pro is recruiting ties within the state of Georgia and really within the South in general. You hire Norval McKenzie, obviously you get those back. Now, I don't know if it's to the level that Tashard Choice had, but McKenzie, been a coach at Georgia Tech for the last few seasons. He replaced Tashard Choice in Atlanta once Choice took the job here in Austin in 2022. He's got ties within that state. Georgia Tech has actually been recruiting really, really well, especially considering the big dogs that they have to recruit against, including their biggest in-state rival, Georgia. They've done a great job with Brent Key in recent years. They've got more money and more resources than you would think, and they've fielded a pretty competitive football team the last couple of seasons, and they've got a shot to do some things in the ACC next year. I don't know how much any of y'all care about that. What you do care about is what Georgia Tech's run game has looked like in the past couple of seasons with Norval McKenzie as the running backs coach. They led the ACC in rushing in 2023. They were second in the ACC in rushing in 2024. Jamal Haynes, their starting running back, was an all-conference back for the Yellow Jackets this past season. So pretty good. I know the ACC the last 2 years hasn't been the best conference in college football, but it is still a Power Four. They did get 2 teams into the playoff this year, and Georgia Tech has been able to run the ball successfully against just about everybody that they've gone up against in that league. Of course, Georgia Tech took Georgia to like 8 overtimes this year. I don't think it was like 8 overtimes. I think it was 8 overtimes this year, and the run game was a big part of that. And here's another interesting nugget here, guys and gals. I don't know if this means anything. Maybe I'm reaching here. I'm sorry if I am, but I mentioned this as one of the bullet points. Haynes King was the quarterback at GT this past season, and he was a big part of the Yellow Jackets run game. If you watched that game against Georgia, which I think everybody did because it was a standalone game on that Friday after Thanksgiving, you saw how big of a factor Haynes King was in Georgia Tech's rushing offense. Texas has a dual threat quarterback taking over in 2025. Now, nobody wants Arch Manning to be running it 15 to 20 times a game like Haynes King was doing. I mean, that guy was a crash dummy in that game against Georgia. It was ridiculous how many hits he took, and it cost him at the end of the fourth quarter because he fumbled the ball when Georgia Tech had the chance to put that game away in regulation. So I don't want Arch Manning to do what Haynes King was doing by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we all want the quarterback run game to be a bigger part of the Longhorn offense in 2025, and it should be. Quinn Ewers not very mobile. He had a lot of strengths. Running the football wasn't one of them. Arch Manning, much faster, much bigger, much more physical, much more of a pure runner. Like that should be a weapon for Steve Sarkisian this coming season, especially in the red zone. My gosh, we all know how bad Texas has been in the red area. Arch Manning's legs should help that problem a lot, but I'm not just talking about inside the 20. I'm talking about all over the field, zone reads, RPOs, design quarterback rollouts, design quarterback runs. Those things should be implemented in the Texas offense. And maybe Norval McKenzie, having worked with a dual threat QB the past couple of seasons, knows what it takes to be successful in doing that. Again, it's not a total apples to apples comparison, comparing Haynes King and his style of running to what Arch Manning is going to be at Texas, but there are maybe some principles, some concepts, some noteworthy items that Norval McKenzie can bring from his time at Georgia Tech here to Austin, if he, in fact, is the decision that Steve Sarkisian makes. A little bit more on Norval McKenzie. He's also been a running backs coach at Vanderbilt and Louisville, so a little bit of SEC experience from his time at Vandy. I don't know if any Vandy football before the 2024 season is worth talking about, but McKenzie's been at a few stops. He's been a Division I running backs coach for 12 seasons. And again, Georgia Tech's run game has been really, really good in each of the past couple of seasons. He's also a college football player at Vanderbilt, too. So SEC experience as a player, SEC experience as a coach, too. So there's a little bit of Norval McKenzie background for you people. If y'all have questions, if y'all have comments, let me know what's on your mind right now. Out of those 3 names, who do you want the Longhorns to hire? Chad Scott from West Virginia, Norval McKenzie at Georgia Tech, or EJ Barthel at Nebraska? Or is there somebody else that you would rather Steve Sarkisian bring in? Maybe this search isn't done. Maybe there's a few more names that are being considered. On this channel, we've talked about Rashad Samples at Oregon. We've talked about Carlos Lachlan at Ohio State. We've talked about Chris Gilbert, who would be an internal hire, a guy who's already on Steve Sarkisian's staff at UT. There are other names in the mix. This is a highly coveted job. Like, Steve Sarkisian should not settle, and I don't think he will settle. The fact that this search has gone on as long as it has, I think tells you that Steve Sarkisian is exhausting all of his options. He's got connections in college. He's got connections in the NFL. I would think he's talking to dozens of candidates, if not closer to hundreds of candidates for this opening, because a lot of people would bend over backwards for this opportunity. The last 2 running backs coaches at Texas, one of them got a Division I college football head coaching job. The other one just got a gig with the Detroit Lions, and he's going to be one of the highest paid position coaches in the NFL. So that makes it attractive. Obviously, we know what Texas has done on the field the last 2 seasons, the resources that you get here in Austin. And oh, by the way, the running back room that you're walking into with Trey Wisner coming off of a 1,000-yard season, with CJ Baxter, former #1 running back recruit in America in the class of 2023, coming off injury, but he's still here. You've got Jared Gibson as well, who was a top 3 running back in last year's class. You got a few more incoming blue chip recruits as well. Texas is always going to have running back talent. And oh, by the way, 4 of the top 5 running back recruits in this cycle, 2026, are Texas high schoolers. Did a video talking about Keenan Hall, Baylor's running back coach, a little bit earlier today. If you missed that one, check it out. It's on the channel. Check it out after we're done here. Don't leave yet. We're still having some fun. But I was pretty intrigued by the name Keenan Hall because, well, he's coached at SMU and Baylor the last 3 seasons. So he already has had conversations with those 4 top 5 running backs in the class of 2026. And Baylor just had a really good year running the football. They just had a freshman tailback go for over 1,000 yards for the first time in school history. So Keenan Hall is another name not mentioned in today's reports, but another name that I know some Longhorn fans have talked about. And I did some behind the scenes researching and had a couple of conversations. And he's been regarded as a very, very good recruiter as well. Again, ties to the state of Texas. He's from Dallas, played his high school ball at South Oak Cliff. So he's another guy who checks some boxes that I wouldn't hate to see the Longhorns at least interview. Maybe they already have. Who knows? Albert asks, do you think we are going to steal one of the running backs from one of these coaches' programs also? That's a great question, Albert. You know, the transfer portal is not open right now. It will open again after the spring. I don't know if Texas wants any of these running backs. Like West Virginia, is there anybody at West Virginia, Nebraska, or Georgia Tech that the Longhorns want to get? Of course, you would take depth, but is anybody better than CJ Baxter and Trey Wisner? Maybe Jamal Haynes. We talked about him. He was an all ACC running back a season ago. I think he's still at Georgia Tech. I don't think he hit the portal anywhere. So maybe he'd be an upgrade over what you have right now. But I don't think there's anybody at Nebraska. I don't know if there's anybody at West Virginia that I really want the Longhorns to go after, because I just don't think they're better than anybody you have right now. And, you know, the one guy I would mention is CJ Donaldson, but he transferred. He was at West Virginia. Texas saw him in 2023, maybe 2022. I can't remember. He was a stud. He just transferred to Ohio State, and he's probably going to start there, replacing Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. So that would be the guy I would have brought up first, but he's already gone to Ohio State. I don't think he's going to hit the portal to come to Texas after he just hit the portal this offseason already. So Jamal Haynes would be the only guy I would look at, Albert. But if you asked me to put money on any of those guys coming to Texas, no, I don't think so. I think the Horns are pretty satisfied with what they've got in their running back room right now. I don't think they're going to go after any portal back unless some huge name enters after the spring, or unless, God forbid, there's a loud knock on wood here, so don't blame me. If somebody goes down in the spring for Texas and they're short on numbers again, those are the only 2 realistic scenarios where I see them adding a starting caliber back to this roster. Shout out Cody. Smash the like button. Don't forget to give this video the thumbs up. And if you're a Texans fan, check out the great work my boy Cody Stutes does covering the Houston Texans. Yeah, I'm with you, C. Gaddis. I don't think there's anybody. I know there's nobody in the portal right now, but realistically, I don't think there's anybody who will enter the portal in April that is better than CJ Baxter, Trey Wisner, or even Jared Gibson, to be perfectly honest with you. Unusual Suspect says, I would go with the guy from Georgia Tech. They did almost beat Georgia last year. Yeah, we all saw that game. And again, Georgia Tech they're building a little something in Atlanta right now. Brent Key's doing a really good job. They've got money. Atlanta's a big city. There's obviously a lot of recruiting talent there. You know, Georgia can't get everybody. So some of those guys who want to stay in state, who are from the state, might end up going to Georgia Tech, which will help boost their recruiting and just overall talent in general. So I like what they've done, and they had a good year, and the ACC is wide open. I know Clemson's still there. Clemson's going to be a preseason top 10, and they should be. SMU coming off a college football playoff appearance. They're still going to be in the mix. Miami's obviously in the conversation, but don't sleep on Georgia Tech. It feels like a different team wins that conference every single year. Hell, Florida State went from first to the worst team we've ever seen in the span of one season. So Georgia Tech could be relevant. Norval McKenzie was a part of their success that they had last season as well. Cody asks, is there a portal wish position post-spring? Ask me after the spring. No, right now, I am looking at pass catcher. I know that's not a position per se, but just pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends. That's what I'm looking at for Texas. I am stunned that they did not bring in anybody in the early portal window. I think part of that had to do with the fact that Texas was playing so late into the season that they went after a couple of guys, but I honestly don't think they recruited those guys as hard as other schools who weren't in the college football playoff. And I think that maybe cost the Longhorns the opportunity at guys like Eric Singleton Jr., speaking of Georgia Tech, the Georgia Tech transfer who ended up at Auburn. So they didn't bring anybody in a year after bringing in 3 transfer portal wide receivers who all helped contribute to the Longhorns making it to the SEC title game. So I'm a little surprised they didn't bring anybody in. All they have is Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore in terms of proven commodities at receiver. And then they've got nobody at tight end that we know a thing about. Right? I'm excited to see what Jordan Washington can do. I'm excited about Spencer Shannon being like 6'7", 260. If that guy can run some routes, and if he's got soft enough hands, then he's going to be a matchup nightmare for opposing defenses. But those guys have 0 combined college catches. Gunnar Helm's gone. Obviously, he lost J.T. Sanders 2 years ago. So that's number one for me. You could use bodies on the lines of scrimmage, both lines of scrimmage. But right now, if you asked me what position I think Texas needs the most to bolster its current roster, I would say pass catchers with those wide receivers and those tight ends. All right, go for another minute or two. If y'all have any final questions, don't forget to holler. Please remember to hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I promise I'll be more consistent doing these live streams. You know what? I will ask this to y'all right now, or I will ask this from y'all right now. Trying to figure out a good time to do some daily live videos on this channel. What times would y'all want? What works best for y'all's schedule? I want to try to reach as many people as possible and get as many people as possible into these live chats when we do these daily shows. So let me know what you're thinking on that. If you're watching after the fact, feel free to comment below. But yeah, we're posting daily recorded videos. I promise we'll do a better job of getting more live content coming in moving forward. I think that's it. I think that's all I got for this video. Again, we will see if something comes down, but breaking news, the national people are starting to report that Texas is closing in on a hiring for their next running backs coach. We'll see if this gets done at some point before the weekend. Unusual Suspect says like 7 or 8 p.m. The only problem with that Unusual Suspect is Texas is playing a lot of games at that time. Basketball, baseball, like stuff that y'all want to watch, I think. Stuff that I want to watch, I know. So I'm not opposed to that idea. I do have 2 TVs behind me, although I don't think YouTube's copyright laws will allow me to have the games on. Otherwise, you guys could watch behind me and I could just watch through my computer screen and it would be great. But maybe the night shows could be the play because I know people are home from work. Maybe they're looking for some Longhorn conversation. But we'll see. We'll see. Thank you for commenting either way. And thank y'all for watching. That's going to do it for this live stream. Appreciate y'all tuning in. We'll see what happens, but we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of the BK Show. Remember, when you watch the BK Show, you rule. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Hook 'em.